Hi, this is Adrian. Writing these words in November, we anticipated that by now in the session, everyone will have heard a lot about Mary as a scholar. So we want to make a slight detour and say a little about her as a person and as a friend. Although my collaborator, the other Mary Praetzellis, actually wrote most of this paper, she's asked me to present it. So Mary, my collaborator that is, writes that one of her own first big disappointments in life after realizing that her dad would never be president came on her 16th birthday. She really believed that hype about the Sweet 16 and expected some kind of transformation, but she woke up just the same dorky kid. Again, my wife wrote this stuff, I'm just the mouthpiece. But anyway, for Mary Beaudry, things seem to have been a bit different. Her high school yearbook picture shows this demure young lady with stylish bobbed hair looking pretty confidently at the camera for a teenager. She was in pep club, student government, bubblegum revolution, whatever that was. She was mistress of ceremonies at her high school beauty pageant, and she was on the yearbook staff, which may, I suppose, explain this. By the age of 18 then, Mary had pretty much mastered her social skills and was well on her way. She even knew how to accessorize, something she did for the rest of her life. Although the two Marys were the eldest of numerous siblings and very much lapsed Catholics and obviously shared a name, they had apparently little in common. One was this budding academic star, and one was the working mother of two. Still, they became good friends and commiserated when their respective baseball teams sunk into the basement or prepared to leave town. Mary wasn't just someone we would run into at conferences, of course. She turned out to be a wonderful correspondent, and it was actually she, incidentally, who coined that term Praetzellis, Praetzelli, that is, as the plural of our married name. And over 4 decades, the three of us became good friends. We imagined more time for that friendship, but obviously that didn't work out. The two Marys first met in person at the 1985 SHA conference in Boston. Beaudry was the organizer, but was working the registration table when the other Mary picked up our reg packages. Mary Praetzellis writes that, quote, she recognized my name, which made me feel important, and proceeded to tell me what was bothering her. I thought it was a little early to have had too much to drink, but that was just Mary. She often looked hungover or just about to become so. Now, 4 years previously, in 1981, we had written a paper for the SHA meetings in New Orleans with our friend Marley Brown. Beaudry had heard it and asked if we would like to be in her edited volume, this one. We gratefully agreed and sent drafts back and forth over this newfangled gizmo called electronic mail that you may remember. Mary was surprised and indeed grateful at how rapidly we replied to her requests. She was used to the ways of academicians even then. But, my collaborator and I worked at the time in that nasty alternate universe designated by 3 letters, a CRM, where missed deadlines meant unemployment. Evidently it was different in Mary's world, where, as a friend once remarked, deadlines are where you begin. Who knew? Now, I'm the first to admit that there was much not to like about that early article. In fact, the three of us joked that we were auditioning to be Ronald Reagan's archaeologist, which leads us to another SHA meeting from which we were absent years later. I tell the story because it illustrates an important aspect of Mary's character. So, back again to that long ago conference. There, a certain speaker took a pretty casual swipe at our article's thesis on the way to their own conclusion that, in short, archaeology demonstrated how the Irish drank too much. Well, these comments didn't go over too well with Mary, and later on she told us she'd run into this person in the elevator, describing them in typical Baudelaire-esque fashion as, quote, unwashed. Yikes. I won't say Mary was a gossip, but she knew a lot about people, and some of it got around. In fact, we learned things about certain colleagues that we would prefer not to have known and haven't yet been able to forget even now. It was after Mary visited us in our new suburban home that Mary, the other Mary, that is my collaborator Mary, got this reputation as a pathological clean freak. So here's the story. It had taken my Mary days and days to clean the scroungy kitchen before we moved out of our previous home, and she was determined not to have the same problem with the new one. So every evening she would scrub the floor on her hands and knees. Now, Mary B witnessed this domestic spectacle several times while on a visit, and from mutual friends we soon started hearing all about Mary Praetzellis' obsessive behaviour. No, I won't say Mary was a gossip. I'm not going to say it. Although she worked hard to support deserving students, sometimes Mary found that some of them were just not archaeological material in their work habits or, dare I say it, their politics. Mary herself was a lifelong Democrat who subsisted on a pathetic salary at an expensive private school that we all know, and sometimes she ran into difficulties with the cost of just keeping up, which we also know. And as a result, she wasn't at all sympathetic with pampered whiners. In case you can't read the handwriting, what it says is, "My summer has been odd but productive archaeologically. Despite the worst group of field students I've ever encountered, lazy, whining, complaining, and conservative Republicans to boot. Little shits." Of course, Mary didn't hold back on her peers either. No, she was not patient with what she thought was lazy, unimaginative archaeology. Her own mentor is famously said to have stated that it's better to be wrong than boring. I don't know if he ever actually did say that. I don't know that Mary would have gone that far, but archaeology that was both boring to her and what she considered wrong-headed certainly got at you on her bad side. Mary could be a bit cantankerous, but she told us that she tried to play nice in public. Well, sometimes anyway. At least when she sat on those big league interdisciplinary panels as the only archaeologist, and obviously probably the only one. Once I asked her to comment on one of those other panelists, and she wrote back in her characteristic take no prisoners attitude, "If you plan to approach him, do so in a crouched position with pursed lips and approach him from the rear." But, she did approve of his progressive politics, which I suppose is something. Over the years, Mary would come and stay with us in California, and of course we got together at conferences. Mary was in each of our notorious storytelling sessions and volunteered at the Archaeology Roadshow that we organised at the 2006 SHAs in Sacramento. We also gave papers in her sessions and contributed to her edited volumes. Yeah, there was always things to write and to talk about with Mary, and some of it even related to archaeology. Mary stayed with us for a week after that Sacramento conference and worked on sewing-related artifacts from one of our San Francisco excavations. She scrutinized each of hundreds of odd items with a magnifying glass, and some were pretty odd indeed. While looking for wear pattern, she found this odd little wooden thingy with a tiny etching on it, and in her notes Mary commented that she thought the picture had been scratched onto the artefact as an afterthought. By whom? Why? Can't say. Like many women of her generation, Mary sacrificed a lot to be an academic, but she didn't hold it against women who made a different choice. In fact, I think the three of us got along so well because we two, my Mary and I, were a couple who shared a career. When Mary stayed with us the first time, our kids were young, and the youngest was truly obnoxious. He's a lawyer now. Okay. Now, Mary certainly couldn't relate to the kids like undergraduates, but she bore up pretty cheerfully in what, for a single person, must have seemed like a rather chaotic household, to say the least. And much later, when our first grandchild had her own blog, Mary became one of its biggest fans. Isn't that cute? Yes. I've always felt like a changeling as a child, so it's far from surprising I feel alien now. Mary wrote that several years into her job at BU, because although research and teaching were her life, she had mixed feelings about academia itself. Actually, not so mixed. Like most of us, she found the so-called ivory tower rather grimy when viewed at close range. And, of course, historical archaeology is a rough and still maligned field, and career-wise it can be a long path to nowhere. You have to master so many skills. And to find a decent site, you need ability, perseverance, and just dumb luck. Mary, of course, managed to do it all. As a teacher, as a scholar, as an innovator. She was all that. Mary had a sharp mind and sometimes a sharp tongue. But then there was that bright smile of hers. And that's the thing that's going to stay with us, I think. Well, thanks for listening, folks. And thanks to Luann and colleagues for organising this tribute. And all I can say is, cheers, Mary. That was good. Bye now.